So Chinatown is an interesting area where historically it's sort of been kind of an enclave that was not necessarily considered a residential type neighborhood, and surrounded by neighborhoods that are also not typically residential. You're right next to the Leather District, where South Station is, sort of on the outskirts of Theater District and Boston. But what we've seen over the past few years is that those areas around Chinatown have really started to develop, and Tufts Medical Center has brought more students down there, and it's starting to become, in the Leather District, a trendy and kind of more a younger crowd, but a upwardly moving crowd. And what happens when all around this enclave of Chinatown is all of this growth, it's really changed, I think, the dynamic in Chinatown. When we look at the data from the past probably 10 years, what we saw was that a lot of the multifamily properties and some smaller family-owned apartment buildings got sold, and either were renovated, at which point the prices went up for the rental, or they were purchased by a larger commercial entity and totally transformed into bigger apartment buildings. Then you look at right now with Ink Block and some of the other places that are right next to Chinatown, these new buildings are offering so much more in the way of luxury apartment rentals, and something that's very different from, I think, what Chinatown looked like 10, 15 years ago. So I think it's definitely getting to a situation where when you walk through Chinatown now, you can still see the older men playing checkers, and you can still see some of what it used to be over by the gate, but the area feels so small now that I think you can't help but see that it's dwindling and at least changing. At the same time that you're sort of standing under the gate, you're then looking across the street to all of these new high-rise buildings. Not all of them apartments, but it's definitely just changing, and it offers an interesting juxtaposition. But I guess the question is, what happens when it's entirely surrounded by all of these huge buildings? I think displacement is something that is more in the eye of the person who is moving. There are several reasons, that the person might move. They may be displaced because they can no longer afford it, which I think is how we typically might feel about the word displaced. But I think the reality of the situation is that as prices increase, as things change, it also changes the character. And so people who move to a certain location for the character that was there, as that changes, they may no longer want to stay there anyway. And so I think there's a lot of factors going on. The easiest one to point to is obviously price and availability. And on that end, it's certainly much less affordable to live in Chinatown or near Chinatown than it was 10, 15 years ago. And for a lot of people, that may be the number one factor for why they either no longer live there or can't afford to live there. And so if you view displacement in that way, I think you could say sure. Bostonians, I think, generally are open to, or not open, but receptive to cultural pieces and to history. And just like in Back Bay, how we still have these 4-story brownstone buildings, which are not a great use of resource in terms of the footprint and how many units you can fit. But it's history. They all started as single-family homes and then slowly changed into condos. And some of the brownstones in Back Bay are still single-family, and they're only 4 stories tall. So Bostonians, I think, respect that history, and in Chinatown, at the same time that you are building these new big places, I don't think that Boston as a community and as an area would ever really allow, I guess we could use, a big bulldozer to just come in and totally take it out. in order to make more apartments or living space. I don't think that that's in the character of Bostonians, and so I don't think that it's really going anywhere. I think it changes, but I think the idea of having kind of that cultural center, however it looks, whether it's a little more modern or still kind of the gritty Chinatown that we know now, I think there will always be something.